From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast.
Thank you all for coming. Can you hear me well enough? Okay. Without the need for DNA or ultrasound, when I started 16 years ago, I was nervous about whether or not the customers were going to like the meat, and I'd heard that they could ultrasound and tell you what was on the inside by looking through, and it wasn't what they would normally use an ultrasound for, but if you kind of looked at it a little crossways, you could figure out what it was saying. So the last year that I did that, I spent $1,065 getting, I don't remember how many animals sounded, and I had already scored them before I brought them to the corral. I was looking at the ultrasound and scoring them on a different notepad as the technician was doing the job, and then I cut them all out, glued them into a little spiral-bound book, and mailed it off to Gerald Fry, and said, Gerald, would you score these for me? And I have one in my mind, and on the ultrasound that was marginal for quality grass-finished beef. Came back from Gerald's, and I mean we were maybe off a quarter of a point, 1 to 5, and the one that I thought was not going to be up to my standard was the same one that Gerald thought. And that was the last time I spent any money on ultrasound. Well, how did I know to choose those animals? In the spring of, what year? 2003, I believe it was. I drove from New Meadows, Idaho, down to Sacramento, California, to hear Gerald Fry talk about how to visually identify tender, flavorful beef. If there's anybody to thank for what you're going to hear today, the majority of what you're going to hear came originally from Gerald. I learned a few things along the way beyond that, but I guess starting out, that's kind of where I'm at. If you do have a question, ask. I like to gear this especially to what you want to hear. I do have a few kind of ground rules, or whatever you might want to call them. For me, when I go to say something about a cow, if you have this or if you don't have this, that's, if you leave everything else equal, a cow that has this and the one that doesn't, there's a difference there. But you really can't do that in nature. That's more science. Then I like things that are natural, they work, and they don't cost a lot of money. If you focus on one thing, and that's probably a little more from yesterday's talk than today, if you focus on one thing, you'll take it too far. I have seen cattle get too thick. That doesn't necessarily take away from a good eating experience, but it certainly takes away from a cow being a good, productive animal. But the three things today, like yesterday, we talked about a shape, butterfat, glandular function, and how well the villi in the rumen got developed. Well, the three things today are the bone, its size and its shape, the hide, how loose it is, and then the fact that all of these traits are linked together. If you've got, let's just say there's 8 or 9 things here on the list. If you've got 1 or 2, maybe you have it, maybe you don't. If you've got 7 or 8, you really have what you're looking for. So this is kind of the list of things that I'm going to go through, and you're going to see this list a number of times through. So there'll be plenty of time to write these things down. But when I first started, they said that 10% of the tenderness of a piece of meat was how much fat there was in it. 60% was the genetics, the epigenetics, and how you handle them, which is actually a form of epigenetics. And then 30% happens in the last 24 hours they're alive and how they're processed. So you can do a great job, and if you've got the wrong butcher, your customers are not going to be happy. So I try to work with there's only one USDA plant, so I try to be more than just a number, but I've found what I think is the best butcher in the area to do the on-farm harvest for the quarter, half, and whole animals. These three on the bottom here, when I first got into all of this, I came about it. Well, I was reading the Stockman Grass Farmer since '89, and they were talking about grass-fed beef, but this Oiling of America there by Mary Enig, one doctor told me to quit eating this, start eating that, and the pain went away. And that was the very first article I ever read on the Weston Price website, and I was hooked. And, we've been lied to about what fat is for a long time. And as grass-fed meat, milk, if any of you heard Dr. Ulrich talk, there are over 900 oils in milk, 900 different fats in milk. I didn't know that before. And then probably one of the best articles that I've ever read talking about the difference between carbohydrates, if you will, versus fats and protein is this Yudkin versus Keyes. Just Google that. It's a really interesting article. So notice I put clean fat. We need the right kind of fats. I got into grass finishing for omega-3s. This is all ground everybody knows about. The picture doesn't change, but omega-6s tend to clump together in the meat, in our arteries. Omega-3s are more dispersed. Rarely does a steak show as a grass-fed steak show as much fat as in there by looking at it in a picture like this. It always precipitates out more fat. You might have one that looked high select and it might be low or medium choice, which was kind of an aha for me when I found that out. You all have the starting place that you're at. We could talk about how to find a different bull or different cows or whatever, but the main gist of what I want to get across today, and I don't need to read all these words to you, but the main gist I want to get across today is cherry pick the cows you have now, the offspring that you're using, and then try to use a bull to create even better meat in the future. I'll just kind of go on with that. So a wide, deep, short animal will do better on grass than a long, tall, thin animal. We have long, tall, thin animals in a lot of cases because for the last 60 or 70 years, that's what everybody's been breeding for because that's what the feedlot system wants. All right. Well, so we find an animal that we want. Do we have the kind of grass that will actually finish an animal? We can have kind of poor animals with really good grass and have a pretty good eating experience. We can have really good animals with kind of poor grass and still have a pretty good eating experience. The farther you are away from either the right kind of animal or the right kind of grass, the more supplements, whatnot, you're going to have to use to ensure that your customer does get a good eating experience. I had a lot of people that I've talked to over the years that, I tried that grass-finished beef and it wasn't any good. Well, in my mind, it's this deal. You had some feedlot genetics. That piece of ground you can't farm, it was neglected. The bricks is 1 or 2 on the grass, and you waited until a month after the grass was all gone. It's not going to be a very good eating experience for anybody. Anybody in here use a refractometer? Okay, hey. Okay, well, hey, this is great. I used to pack one with me all the time. I got to where I got tired of packing it around, so I'm always chewing on clover to kind of find out where they're at. And it's either bitter right at the beginning, or it's bitter in the middle, or it's kind of bitter at the end, or it never gets bitter. When it never gets bitter, get your refractometer out, because now you can finish some cattle or make some milk or whatever you're trying to do on grass. And add minerals. Maynard Murray, Sea Energy Agriculture, Elaine Ingham. You put the biology out there, they'll go find the minerals. You can do them both together. Pulse Grays, Gabe Brown. I don't know who all in here knows Gabe Brown 5 Things. It's a minimum or no-till, living root as long as possible, armor on the soil. Here we got Sea Energy Agriculture. That's the Maynard Murray book. Living root, armor on the soil, diversity of species, and animal impact, that pulse grazing. Gabe knows a lot. If you've never heard Gabe, go online, watch some YouTubes if you get a chance to see him in person. He really can tell you quite a bit. So I was just trying to get a picture here of it's all grazed out, and then we're going to call the butcher in the fall of the year and try to get a slot. This doesn't work. I mean, some of you have tried this. What I do at home is I get the Old Farmer's Almanac in this right after first of the year. Actually, I found one here just the other day. And in about 25 pages from the back, there's a list of a lot of things, best days too. There's a best day to harvest every month. Some months there's two sets of dates. Choose those dates. The meat will be juicier and more flavorful when the blood is out, when the moon is right, than if you're harvesting on the best day to castrate, when the blood is down. Okay? This will make a difference. So I've told you some of the things that I think, kind of ground rules about what we need to do. So now what I want to do is to get into a little more what it is that I heard from Gerald and started practicing and dug in a little deeper about. You heard me say earlier, everything else being equal. The younger in life, your harvest, the easier keeping your animals, the more tender the meat's going to be. The older in life, the more flavorful the meat. And this mineral-rich, toxin-free, yesterday I had that teeter-totter scale deal. We've got too many toxins and not enough minerals. This will help you finish your animals. So, let's see these things in the cattle. There are things all over, and it's related to hide and bone and glandular function. And they tell us how tender the meat will be, and they're all linked together. Yesterday I was talking about butter fat. It's linked to tender meat. We're about to come up to the list again here, but I just had a couple of cows that the Hereford on the top, she had just calved, and it's an exceptionally large pancreatic hair whorl there on her side. But the reason that I have her in there is she has good glandular function. Dr. Bonsma wrote the book Man Must Measure, and he knew all this stuff and more. And he said if he could only use one thing to decide which animal he wanted to eat for the year, it would be the one that shed its hair coat the earliest in the spring, because that was the healthiest animal, so that would be the healthiest meat for him to eat. So back to the list here. This was obviously a black cow, but a little cow I had at home, and she just epitomized. She had almost double the butter fat on that last DNA or a ultrasound thing of any other cow I had. So she's kind of my poster child, the one that I aspire all the rest of my animals to look like. So disposition. When I go to somebody's place and I see a shape out there that I'm looking for, the very next thing I look at is disposition. I mean, if I can't read their number, I don't care how good they look. That is not going to be a tender piece of meat. You can do some things. I have found that iodine, we're all deficient in iodine, and even more so now after Fukushima, but you can bring the disposition of cattle down in a number of ways. One is get rid of the knotheads out of the group, and everybody else calms down a little bit. But if you get the iodine right, they'll calm down. The whole herd will calm down a little bit. How do you get the iodine right? This is a great question. A really old vet 20 years ago, 25, said, when you're feeding a little more iodine, my face is not itching. I'm trying to show you where there you would have water running down normally at the upper edge of the eye when they're getting a little more iodine than they need. And you could back off of how much is in your mineral. So after Fukushima, I had doubled the amount of iodine I was putting in my mineral, and I still couldn't get my cow's eyes to water. And then I started adding 1/2 cup of 20-mule team borax, which is the only mineral that can accept radiation of all forms, and just grabs a hold of them and takes them out the exhaust pipe. As soon as I did that, virtually every animal's eyes started watering, and I could back off on the iodine. So in cattle, a sign of sufficiency is weeping in the eyes, sometimes down here, but normally up here, and they're not cloudy. They're just weeping. I like to have 10-15% of my herd. In humans, the sign of deficiency is you wake up every morning with the sleepies in the corner of your eyes or a matted eyelash. I was at a gentleman's place once, and I saw one of his kids. I'm getting way off track. I better stop this. And one of his boys had just a matted eyelash. I think there were 9 or 10 in the family, and I turned around and I said, "Look at so-and-so's eyelashes. You've got a raging iodine deficiency. You need to fix this." And it's not just him, it's all 10 of you. It's back there a year and a half later, crystal clear eyes. So small, dense bone, the knee joint above that. In this one, she's just got a silky hair coat and then glandular expression, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But this next slide is more about the bones. I had seen Gerald there in 2003 down in Sacramento. Well, then I went up to Moses Lake, Washington, to a friend's place. He had Gerald come up, and Charles Walters called, was needing pictures of dung beetles and some manure for the book that's upstairs or wherever it is. And he must have asked Gerald what he's doing. He says, "Well, I'm standing here looking over the fence at Miss America." So I knew I was looking at a really good cow. But the thing that I never really got was the shape of this front leg. I had to go back to that guy's ranch a year later, drove an hour out of my way each direction when I was in Washington State to see that cow, to see what Gerald had told me, but I didn't get out of the shape of that bone. So one of the things about the bone is unusually small for the size of the animal. Bulls are always going to have bigger bones than cows, but for the size of the animal. So somebody was asking me, well, what would I look for? So I was using the keyboard and trying to come as close as I could to describing, well, what would they look like? And the two parentheses there on the left are the knee joint, kind of close together. Clear over to the right, you see how much wider I have them? Well, look at the picture above and the size of that knee joint, and then look to the picture on the left and see how small that is, like a deer or an elk. Very small in diameter, but short in length. And then once they get small, they ever so slowly widen out just to the width of the hoof. Can you all see this in this photo? Do we need to turn the lights down so this pops out anymore? We're good? Okay. And of all the things that I'm going to talk about today, if you can cement in your mind what that is, this will be the best indicator of gourmet beef. Now, if you don't want to have to learn anything else in the room and you have access to a lot of free Martin heifers, they're all gourmet beef. So half of you can get up now and walk out because none of the rest of this will be important. But free Martin heifers, if you can get your hands on them, you want to finish those because your customers will like those. And what's a free Martin heifer? Someone had twins. A cow had twins. A boy and a girl. 94% of the time, she is a free Martin heifer. What about the hoof? On the left, once that gets small, just below that cow's knee, you see what I did with there it says tender and then cannon. I've got the forward slash and the back slash. We want those widening out just to the width of the hoof. We don't want them going down and splaying out at the last minute. That's not bad, but really good meat is where they're like the keystrokes on the far left side. From the knee down. Yep. And I have a few, I don't know, yesterday I have a few zip drives of these 2 PowerPoints still left from yesterday if anybody wants one. So cementing this in your mind. I just saw this one on the right about a week ago. And in Idaho, you have to ask before you take a picture on somebody's farm. They passed a law because people that were doing bad things were getting in trouble because people were coming on their farms and taking videos and pictures. So they passed a law that says you have to ask the fellow that owned this steer.
Hey everybody, this year's 50th annual Acres USA EcoEgg Conference was one for the record books. And now you can relive many of the inspiring moments. The 2025 EcoEgg recordings are now available for purchase, featuring all keynotes, breakout sessions, and other expert presentations from the nation's leading ecological ag thinkers and practitioners such as Gabe Brown, Joel Salatin, John Kemp, Nasha Winters, Dr. Don Huber, and many more. There's over 30 presentations. Whether you're a farmer, rancher, educator, or ag professional, these recordings put the best of sustainable agriculture at your fingertips, so you can learn at your pace, revisit ideas, and take your operation to the next level. Don't miss out and head to the link in the show notes and get your complete set of the 2025 EcoEgg recordings today. Your soil, your farm, and your future will thank you.
I mean, that steer weighs 1,250, 1,300 pounds. Those are really big bones. I didn't blow anything up there or whatnot. Along with the front cannon bone, we're still talking about bones here, is a flat rib bone, not in between, but the rib bone itself and the jaw bone. So this next one, I've got some rib bones, what I could find on line. The guy's hand there on the left, in the middle of that bone, can you see that it's concave? I was at a guy's place, 12 years ago, something like that, picking some steers out. And he had one with kind of a blaze face, and I said, well, where's that blaze face? They're red Angus, but it had a blaze face. Where's that come from? He said, well, probably some Simmental. And I go, they usually don't work very good for grass-finished beef. I hope I didn't insult anybody, but it's the truth. Anyway, I go, hang on. And I went over and I felt the rib bone, and he just had a more dramatic dip in the middle of the rib bone of any animal I'd ever had my hands on. And I go, no, I'll take him. And he goes, what did you do? So we went over and I put his finger in that dip in the middle. So the picture on the right there, I was just trying to show a rounded on the right, a more flat in the middle, and a less rounded on the left. And then I tried to blow that center one up, but I couldn't figure out if it was actually a little bit concave or if it was only flat. Flat's a good piece of meat. Concave is a great piece of meat. Rounded is going to be a tough piece of meat. And so then the jaw, you can see where you're feeling. Can you see? I mean, I've got those two circles, so I kind of tried to blow it up. Can you see how there's a little bit of a ridge there where I blew that up? And over on the one on the right, it's rounded. The one on the right, if you're feeling the jawbone of the animal, that one's going to be chewier than the one on the left, where there's a dip in the middle of that jawbone. And the guys out of Australia, Classic Livestock Management System, CLMS, they took 100 milk cows that they'd already tested for A1, A2 milk and put in front of them. And the only thing those guys did was felt the jawbone and told them whether they were double A2, A1, A2, or double A1, and they got 99 out of 100 right by only feeling the jawbone. And it was that dip in the jawbone. Live animal. Yeah, no need for that DNA. The one on the left, if you see that bone, you see this, there's kind of a ridge here. It dips down into this area. Where this one is, well, let me just go forward. Maybe it's actually easier to see on that slide. Is it easier to see that way? Okay. So this, from that little ridge there, it dips down in here. Where this one is rounded. All right? Good question. The dip in the middle, like the dip in the middle of the rib bone, is really tender meat. The dip in the middle of the jawbone is really tender meat. Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. The dip in the jawbone will kind of be there through life. At a young age, 8, 12, 14 months of age, that dip in the rib, that's when it's the most accurate. The older an animal gets, the more their ribs grow out and the more they tend to have a dip or be flat in the middle. So that acts, thank you, because I'd have gone right past that if you hadn't asked that question. This on the guy holding up there, those dips in the middle of those bones, that's probably good up to maybe 18 months of age. But you've already chosen your animals by then, so that was a Jedi mind trick? Yes, sir. Yes. I don't know if everybody heard the question that was going back to iodine. And if I feed the animals, I wish I had my computer plugged in and I'd show you a chart. I have it here with me. We can do it after the fact. But if I feed the animals everything that they require, specifically here we're talking about iodine, can humans get sufficient? Is that basically what you're asking? It is a great question. So we're in a perfect world, everything else being equal. Over time you could, but it's just like your soil. You get a soil analysis like Cody Holmes. He got a soil analysis. It was going to cost him as much to remineralize his soil as what he paid, his dirt to make it soil as he paid for the dirt. He's like, I'm not doing that. So he moved his cows every day for a year and retested, and it was a little better. Another year, and it was a little better. Another year. At the end of 7 years, his soil was perfect. He didn't add any biology. He didn't add any minerals. Can you wait 7 years? If you're really deficient in iodine, you wake up in the morning and you realize, hey, I got matted eyelashes. You got to go get Lugol's or iodoral or one of these iodine supplements. Unless, 98% of us are deficient in iodine. In the middle of summer, and I worked up to this, but in the middle of summer I take 110 or 20 milligrams of iodine a day, and the mosquitoes don't bite me while I'm irrigating. But I'm getting lots of iodine. The animals that I grow are getting a lot. I could go on and get way distracted. Is that good enough? Yes, sir. When you're saying scrubs, are you meaning you've got scrub cows or you've got scrub offspring you're trying to finish? Okay, and Rock maybe has an answer. I don't mean to not answer the question, but I think it's far enough away from what we're trying to do. I'll be happy to talk after, if that's all right. And if anybody wants to hear that answer, you ask it again. I will forget because I do that sort of thing. Okay, so we're getting past that. A pointed pole. I was reading a book written in, it was either 1858 or 68. And this Hewitt, who was a veterinarian, he talked about this pointed pole and butterfat and tender meat. Well, that spring I'm out fencing and I get to the 40 acres the grass fats are in. I'd already picked them last fall and pretty quick I've got an audience. So, I'm kind of stretching my back. And it's like, hey, pointed pole, pointed pole, pointed pole. All of the animals in that group except for one had a pointed pole, and I didn't even know to look at it. I was looking for the cannon bone and feeling the jaw and the ribs and some other things we're going to get into. So these things kind of all go hand in glove. All right? So adrenal hair whorl, that spot on the back of the cow where the hair goes 360 degrees, the further forward that is, the more tender the meat, the more butterfat in the milk, the more marbling in the meat. And then this cow here has a real, it's like a half a golf ball, a half a tennis ball. If you have a horned cow and her horns are here and here, if the ridge between them is this wide, that's a tough piece of meat. If the ridge between them is this wide, that's a tender piece of meat, a Jersey. I can't remember what that bone is called. I used to know it. Well, that would be the same thing in horned cattle as this little pointed pole in polled cattle. And then another one that I really like is this vertical folds in the hide. I didn't think about the folds until, I'll get there. I didn't think about the folds until I'd had my hands on enough animals pulling that hide away from the ribs. And after a while, you get to notice that the ones that have all the folds, you can pull it out a whole lot farther than the ones that are, quote-unquote, tight-hided. There's a movie, I can't remember the name of it. The guy went around the world. It's not the book Steak. It's a different movie, trying to find the 10 best steaks. And he was talking about the Japanese and massaging the animals while they were alive because they felt like that was going to put more marbling in the meat. Well, you think about an animal like this with a really loose hide, every time they take a step, the hide is massaging them 365 days a year. We didn't have to do any work, so we didn't need the beer and the massage muscles to get that done. So, a couple more examples of folds. The one on the lower right, I had taken a picture of some happy lines, which those things that look like welts between that guy's fingers. The guy wasn't getting, somebody else I was trying to show it to wasn't getting it, and I zoomed in, and I'm like, wow, I wasn't seeing the forest for the trees here. I hadn't even noticed the vertical lines about 2/3 the way back on the ribs on, this is a different bull, but you see how far back in here the ribs, the folds go. This is about where this other one is taken, right here on the animal. Anyway, happy lines, and I haven't proved it yet to myself, and I'm not going to do any double-blind whatever, but I would just imagine that an animal that has happy lines is going to taste better than that same animal that doesn't have happy lines. Well, what creates happy lines? A certain level of maturity, rarely 18 months, usually it's that or older, body condition, and then well mineralized and detoxed. And I think that that's going to give you better flavored meat. And so of all the things that, if you want to go home today, this is number 2. If you've only got that cannon bone and these hide folds, you'll have a lot of these other things that I'm going to talk about or have talked about. But this is the second most important to me. If you want to compare them to ultrasounds, the cannon bone, which is a little harder to know, is number 1. But this one's pretty easy to see, especially on an animal like that. That one right there is probably the one that you're going to go home with and say, I can do that. And that's a pretty soft hide. And you think about right here over the hook bones, there is a book called The Milch Cow in England, written in 1944 by E.R. Cochran, and he talked about the looser the hide was right over the hook bones, the more likely the animal is to marble. You'll have more marbling in the meat. The looser the hide was over the pin bones, the more butter fat there would be in the milk. So a clean hock. You've probably all eaten a steak where it was tender, it was flavorful, and you chewed and chewed and chewed, and when you got all done, there was still this bit of connective tissue, not real thick, but there was this connective tissue, and you didn't know whether you were supposed to be nice and swallow it or put it on your fork and back on the plate. With a clean hock, which these two are better, kind of like our Achilles, where that hide just collapses back in around that tendon that runs from the hock up, right there. If you were to reach in there and around, well, start up above so you don't get kicked, and reach in there and feel it was like you were rubbing hide against hide, you're not going to have any of that connective tissue, that chewy thing that would be left over. I was at a guy's place one time selecting animals. I think the first one through the chute was one of a set of twin steers. And it's like, yeah, I'll take him. Well, about 5 later, here comes the brother. I don't know that this is the twin brother. And I get doing my stuff, and I reach down there, and I mean, it's just like gristle in there. And I don't want him. He's going to be tough meat. This. And he's like, well, how can he be? He's a twin. Well, this is kind of a part of your answer about prepotent, close-bred, years of thoughtful breeding cows and bulls. So we have repeatability. When I first started, I needed to know these things because I was going and cherry picking. And then I started my own cows and I ensured that I had tender meat, and then I tried to do all the stuff for the flavor along the way. Glandular expression. Again, back to kind of my favorite cow here. This cow has a ton of stuff going on, all right? We're just looking at her and thinking, well, you know, nice cow. Some of the things we talked about yesterday, she's got a little bit of a wedge to her. She's deep enough. You don't need one that's any deeper. I think she, for some reason in that photo, might be pinched a little bit from, I think she's slightly longer than that. Yeah. But anyway, the thymus. That looks like that hair is painted uphill. And the bigger that is, generally, overall, the better the health. Now we're back to Jan Bonsma saying the animal that shed its hair coat the earliest in the spring is the one he wanted. Well, this would be an indicator of that. Then where is that adrenal hair whorl? In the shoulder blade area or further forward? Further forward is better. Okay? The pancreatic, that is just going to tell you about glandular function. As she gets pregnant, that is going to grow from the little area like, well, you can see on her that is right here. See, it's already grown, so she's pregnant already. With a cow like that, with the bull still in there, I'll bet that hers grows clear up halfway up her side by the time she calves. But there we go. That's a pregnancy check. We don't need to bring the vet out. The other one is right here in the adrenal hair whorl. When a heifer calf starts cycling, there'll be 3, 4, 5, 6 hairs stand up right in the middle of that when she starts producing estrogen. In the adrenal hair whorl right here. Anyway, I'm sorry, Rock. Yeah, well, you'll find a lot of them back here somewhere, and they're not as much butterfat, there's not as much marbling, they're not as tender a meat. Okay? But anyway, the pregnancy check deal, as long as their hair coats something like this, the only time that those hairs will lay back down is after she starts producing progesterone, which is going to be at least a month, but maybe, well, no. She has to have the effect of progesterone for a while. She starts producing progesterone right away. A month would be really early, but 2 months into pregnancy, those hairs should all lay down in that adrenal hair whorl. So at about 2 months, you could know whether she's pregnant. This pancreatic is individual from cow to cow to cow. That was not a frame 10 Hereford there at the beginning. But I had her up there because she had good glandular function. Hers was exceptionally large. Normally, they don't get too much bigger than what you see right there. A cow might be a week away from calving, and that's all the bigger it is. So here I drew the line, or the circle, to show off the happy lines. Can anybody see those welts sticking out the side of her? I've got another little line that approximating the same angle. It's just below. Can you see that happy line? You're going to know that your mineral program's pretty good and you're getting them detoxed, whether you're using minerals to do that or, personally, I like the Redmond conditioner to do that. But we're not done with her yet. The earlier in life this stifle muscle shows up, the better her glandular system, the better her reproductive soundness, and then kind of one that you're never really talk about, but down here in that lower cannon bone on the back leg, it looks like there's a little area right here that's a shadow. That's because that's concave right there, running up and down. Rarely do you see an animal that has that concave. Now that would be real. She'd eat as good as that other black cow. So the first time I tried something that I call twice-aged beef, it was on that other black cow. She was about 14, couldn't have a calf again. I didn't want to grind her all up, so I cut the steaks, vacuum sealed them, put them in the refrigerator at 35 degrees for 35 days, got them out. Before I froze all of them, I kept one, and I cooked a ribeye steak. And I picked my plate up, and I licked all the fat off of that plate. That was the best piece of meat I've ever eaten in my life. She would eat the same way. This is not that cow. The escutcheon is another one of those glandular functions. I mentioned it yesterday. There was a Frenchman, it took him about 30 years to figure this out on dairy animals in France. And basically the escutcheon mirror, the taller the handle of that shovel is, and the wider it is, the earlier in lactation she'll come into full milk production, and the longer she'll stay in high milk production. And I can't remember. Yeah, I've got it on the next slide, so I might as well go there. You can see how much wider this escutcheon is than the one on the page before. This one widens out just at the top. This one's wide all the way down. But what I really want to show you here is, and Gerald, this was not in Francois Guinon, like filet mignon. This part right here was not in Guinon's book. This little dotted line. If you have a spade that the top of it, and I just put that for example. The top of her spade is not where that dotted line is. Okay, it's lower and it's flat. But I couldn't find the one I wanted to show you, so I just made it up with this cow. If it's like you're going to put that shovel in the ground and your foot's going to slide in towards the handle, that's a lot of butterfat. That'll be marbling in the meat. If it's sloped off to the right, like you were going to put your foot on that spade of that shovel and your foot was going to slide off, that's less butterfat. We're not talking about volume of milk, a little bit volume of milk. We're not talking about protein. On that deal right there, if your shovel is, the top of your shovel is going up like this, more butterfat. If the top of your shovel is sloped off, less butterfat. And then just a few more things, examples of different ones. The lower right-hand one, I like how crisp the lines are here in between this. She's got some long, silky hair in there, which I'd rather not see. Let's go back to this girl. This hair here is really, really short. It's all running uphill. You'd almost have a hard time catching it with your fingernail. Okay, so the one on the right here, she's got this long, silky hair, but I still like the picture just because of how crisp this line was on the spade and on the handle. And the extra teats, more butterfat. More butterfat equals more marbling. More marbling, more flavor and more tender meat. Yeah, these two are extra. You can't see the two in front, but these two are extra. When we were doing a lot of embryos, we found that cows that had the extra teats gave you a whole lot better embryo than the ones that didn't, everything else being equal. So while we're right here and we were talking about vertical lines before, something that I started noticing probably 8 years ago was the more vertical folds you had from the vulva down to the udder area on a heifer calf. On the cow, fine, but we're trying to pick good cows out of heifers. The more vertical folds you've got, and the closer they are together in this area here, the more butterfat she's going to have. Those turn into really good cows. And then this was just a real bald udder. Now, a bald udder at the Canadian border has more hair on it than a bald udder at the Mexican border. Okay? So we got to take our zip code kind of into account. So how do we see this butterfat? And this is at the bottom of the tail, and you can see those yellow flakes. And on this one, you can just kind of barely see them coming out into the hair here. But on this ear, I think I got another little circle. Oh, yeah. Okay, so the same thing. Flakes coming out here. On this ear, you see all this coming out here into the hair. I think I got a circle. That is just loaded with butterfat. It can be really dusty and there's a little oil in there and you think you've got a lot in there. It needs to be this yellow for it to be telling you that it's butterfat. Absolutely. The question is that very pasture versus stored feeds? The more the animals, what's the best way to describe that? The more they're harvesting the feed themselves, the more you're going to get these kinds of responses. The more it's oxidized and the more diesel we've put into the sky putting it up, the less you're going to see of this. So it would be harder to see in the winter. But if you saw it in the winter, that means you really had what you were looking for. Animals that perform well on your winter feed. That was a yawn and not a question. No, sorry, you got to ask a question now. This dark oily streak down the back, healthy sebaceous fluid. Back to Bondsma and early shedding animals. Sebaceous fluid, it's an oil. The flies don't like it. They stay away naturally. How many in here have cows and calves already? How many of you have a bull that hardly has any fly? If you want to breed fly resistance into your herd, use that bull, because he's got a good glandular system, healthy, sebaceous. Usually they just attack the bulls. When you find a bull that doesn't have that and he's got the other things you're looking for, you're going to breed good stuff in. And so if we don't know these things, why do I put less volume of meat? Well, these, as I said yesterday, these animals that have more butter fat, they gain more and they eat less doing it. They don't have to eat as much. I don't know. I don't want to get into that. But the dead hair over the ribs, not what Bondsma was looking for. He wanted them to slick or shed off and slick out really early in the spring. Always hungry. Toes pointed out. Front or back end of an animal, not a very efficient animal. The less efficient the animal, the more months it's going to take to finish that animal, regardless of the quality of your feed. The more straightforward those toes are, the fewer months it's going to take that to finish that animal, regardless of the quality of your feed. Pinched heart girth, not that wedge shape. And then, the dead hair and the low glandular function are kind of the same thing. She does have a big broom tail on the bottom, a lot of hair on the switch, which is a good thing for reproduction. But look at this raised tail process. You guys probably all saw that skeleton I showed yesterday with a really small pelvic opening. Everything else being equal, she's going to have a hard time having a calf. Well, she did have a hard time having a calf as a heifer. So I told you the reason that I don't use DNA and ultrasound anymore. But before those things were invented, people knew how to do this. What we're talking about today is what people knew 100 or 150 years ago. It's been, in my opinion, actively suppressed that you would know these things because you're going to spend less money on all these other businesses that want your money. I want you to keep your money on your own farm. So we need to get back to what our granddaddies and great-granddaddies knew. Basically what that was saying. And God gave us a brain. So I think the bottom one, I was telling you about how the pain went away. The bottom one for me, that's why I do any of this stuff. I am so tired of big business for 2 extra cents taking something else out of our food so they can make more money. I want people to get healthy again. That's why I'm at Acres or Weston A. Price or Moses or any of these things. Is my ultimate goal is to teach you how to do all this stuff so that your customers get healthy. Because when you sell them a piece of meat or a glass of milk, you're now partially responsible for their health.
Hey, Eco Farmers. This is Taylor Henry with Acres USA. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres USA membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres USA magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres USA, but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoAg conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes.
So this one is kind of interesting. You've got these different steaks. Ground beef's ground beef. It's always supposedly always tender. You've got 6 of them in a row. You just take your finger, don't poke a hole, just make a divot. Kind of in a hurry, just make a divot in 5 or 6 of them. The one the divot springs back out of the fastest, that's going to be the chewiest piece of meat. The one the divot stays in the longest, that's going to be the most tender piece of meat in that row that you've tested. And then this skepticism is the chastity of the intellect, preserved through a long youth and exchanged only for truth and fidelity. I hope I gave you some truth today. Seriously, I want you all to go home and benefit from this. This has been very, very valuable to me ever since I first heard Gerald talk about this. I guess it was 14 years ago. So I just left a couple of pictures. Number 1 is that shape of that cannon bone and size and shape. And then number 2 is the folds in the hide. Those would be the two that tell you more about what's on the inside. There's other things go with it too. But and if you have these, you'll have high butter fat in your cow. They'll raise a calf that does better than a cow that doesn't have these things. They'll raise a calf that does. They'll finish earlier in life, I think. Oh, so A1, A2. How much time we got? I have no idea. I left my phone over there so it wouldn't bother me. Okay, do you have questions, right? Okay, how many of you know A1, A2 milk? So I'm going to give you the short, condensed Steve Campbell version of A1, A2 milk. I'll try not to bore those of you who know more than me. All milk has something in it called BCM7, beta-casomorphine, an opiate, an addictive substance. There's 109 proteins that make up milk. At position 67, A1 milk has something in there called histidine. It lets that BCM7 out of the milk into the bloodstream, tends to give us diabetes, autism, schizophrenia, and heart disease. A2 milk has proline. It doesn't let it out, and it tends to prevent those same 4 diseases. Every individual of every mammalian species that's been tested except for cows, sheep, yak, humans, water buffalo, camel, goat, they're all A2. 1798, the Isle of Guernsey closed their borders to the importation of outside cattle. And still today, they are the highest concentration of A2 milk, double A2 milk. Anyway, there's probably more to be said about that, but yes, sir. I don't know the term. Pains as in they feel, I don't know if everybody heard the term he used was cow pains, and it was about how long you took to cool that animal after you killed it before you put it in the cooler. So Joe Robinson, at this same conference Gerald was at, had some data. You can go on, no, she doesn't have it on there. Basically, you didn't want the internal temperature of the meat to drop below 50 degrees for the first 8 hours. And if it did, you got what they called cold shortening. So how did industry get around it? They hooked up a giant hot shot. They electrocuted the carcass, which tenses every muscle in the animal, and then they relax and they don't get that cold shortening. Well, grass-finished beef tends to cold shorten more than grain-finished beef because on average there's less outside fat, and so they're going to cool down quicker when we would get exactly what you described. Yes. Okay, so the USDA inspector says we have to cool it down as soon as possible. And I'm kind of a side note here. The more minerals and vitamins and everything there are in your whatever you're growing, vegetables, you've probably all seen a tomato you can put on the counter and it doesn't rot, it just shrivels up, or a strawberry. Well, they've got all these rules for real no mineral, no nutrition products. We have to cool them that fast. We have rules because it's the lowest common denominator. If you have to live under that, see if they will shroud with the cloth covering so that they don't cool down quite as quick. You have to play by their rules, but if you could put the shroud around them, well, get them fat. I mean, so many grass-fed animals don't have enough covering on the outside. But our problem in that is the fact that normally most people don't get enough outside fat to avoid this problem. Yes, ma'am. The question is, what's my opinion on keeping grass-fed beef 2 to 2.5 years to get the extra fat on? You could get the extra fat on it 24 months or maybe 20 if everything was right. You had the kind of animal that would finish on grass and the right kind of grass, and depending on the time of the year they're born, blah, blah, blah. Everything else being equal, more flavor, but you're better off. Your customers will be happier long term. It is a monumental task to train most of my customers that fat is not a bad thing. But everybody's worried about this 30-month rule, so they have to cut the backbone out. You don't have T-bones. You got a tenderloin in a New York. When I first started, I was probably 28, 30 months of age. I probably averaged something like 22 months of age now because the animals are better and the grass is better. Probably have actually more fat and more marbling now than I did when I was harvesting them earlier. So everybody gets told, oh, you could have a 700-pound carcass at 18 months. And yes, that's possible, but not probable. So you're, in most cases, starting out, they're going to be at least 2 years of age and probably older than that before you get them sufficiently fat to have a really good eating experience. Did everybody kind of get that? I think you're shutting it off anyways. No. Yes, sir. How about clover and alfalfa in the grass mix and how that affects tenderness? Is that kind of the question? Well, we don't want to take anything to the extreme, so we don't want a really, really fast-growing animal because that's kind of stressful and you will have a little chewier. Clover produces 15% more CLA than alfalfa does. Okay? If you're grazing alfalfa, you really need to have baking soda out there, and the baking soda to have is Natural Soda from Rifle, Colorado. This is a brand name, Natural Soda, Rifle, Colorado. When you buy your first bag of this, and you first open that bag, you get a couple of quart jars to take to the house, and then you try Arm & Hammer, and then you try this, and you will throw the Arm & Hammer away. This is the best baking soda. Anyway, it'll prevent 90+% of the bloat you would normally experience on alfalfa. We need, in most cases, we need the legumes, and I'm going to talk, well, I'd almost be heresy to say that alfalfa actually fixes nitrogen, so I'm going to just go ahead and talk about clover. I want it in the pasture to fix nitrogen for the other ones. But above 86 degrees, all grasses lignify except for clover. And I need that out there at that period of time. Maybe you live at a place where it's cool enough that you never experience 92 degrees, but I need the clover form to be eating on at that time to bridge the gap until it cools back off. Yes, sir. A1 milk has the histidine at that position 67 in the protein chain, and it lets this BCM7, beta-casomorphine, an opiate, an addictive substance, out into the milk. And so we get more diabetes, schizophrenia, autism, heart disease. Autistic, I used to say children, I'll be right there, but autistic people, they're supposed to have a casein, gluten-free diet, but if they get A2 milk, they can drink all they want. Okay? The low, like here on the right with the Guernsey, this is the percent that are, you're exactly right. This is the percent that are A1, and this is the percent that are A2. This data is quite a while back. I don't think it jibes with Dr. Ulry's, but Dr. Ulry's data is from people who are wanting to sell A2 milk. So they're picking what they think are their best cows and only sending those in. I'm not. He did a great thing. Every single Friday, Dr. Ulry's computer would get a virus and it would crash. Just as soon as he got your data back from the testing company, he'd give it to you, and then his computer would crash, and it was a dead end. I mean, he was putting himself at risk to protect you as a dairy producer so that the A2 Milk Corporation couldn't come after you for selling their patented product. Well, then the court said, no, you can't patent that thing that's in nature. I'm sorry, yes, sir. You can take tail hairs and send them off. What's the place there in California? Davis, UC Davis. They can also do it in Nebraska, GeneSeek. It's quite a bit less money, but they can actually test for that. GeneSeek in Nebraska. But you can feel that jawbone. And if you've got that concave in there, just behind the front teeth, that's probably going to be A2 milk. So go get a kid goat. Feed it some of your cow's milk. Did it thrive or did it go downhill? Went downhill. Probably because they all get A2 milk from their mom. Oh, perfect. David Woodford. Yep. Okay, did I really mean that it's in the milk or it goes through the intestinal wall and out into the bloodstream? I mean it is in the milk, and if you have histidine at position 67 in the milk, it does let it out into the bloodstream. There is a little let out of mom's milk of the beta-casomorphine, the BCM7, during teething, and then she shuts it off again. But otherwise, if it's A2 milk, I mean, and that's humans, A2 milk, it's all A2 milk. Yes, sir. Mark. Oh, the dung beetles. There was a lady in Texas who had A2, she had milking Devons, and they were all A2. No, they weren't all A2. She had tested them all. The dung beetles tended to go to the A2 dung and not to the other. So I was at a guy's place in southeastern Colorado, and he had one awesome heifer. I have no clue what her A1, A2 status was, but this was absolutely the best heifer out there. We had an evening, we had the whole next day. The next morning we're out, we're moving the cattle, and we come back by, and we're both on four-wheelers. He looks to his left, so I pull off the right, and we look, and I mean, there's like 35 or 40 rollers on one pile of manure. I mean, the four of them are fighting over one ball of the size of my thumb. They were this big or bigger. Anyway, I said it would be interesting to get some DNA from here and from that heifer and find out if that really butterfat-rich heifer is the one that laid this pile, and that's why. I mean, there's other piles around. There were none of those dung beetles on any pile except that one. So you get the right cows. Wow, I'm about to make a prediction. You get the right cows and dung beetles will show up on your property. Yes, sir. Does A1 and A2 get expressed in powdered baby formula? I don't know the answer, but I would be really surprised if there was A2 in that product. Oh, you're asking me. They took A2 milk, dehydrated it. Why would you do this? I don't. Mary, do you know if A2 is denatured with the heating process? I don't think so. The thought here is that the heat would break it down and you wouldn't get the benefit of if you took it from what it was supposed to be in nature, put industrial food into it, and then said, oh, milk is milk. We're going to rehydrate it and we're going to have the same thing. Does that work for you, Mary? That's how I would see it, is if we put industrial processes in it, we lose a lot of what we started with. Well, that might be a good thing. Okay, we could use it. That would be all right. I would hate to lose the A2 if I had it to start with, but if that process got rid of A1, I'd be happy with that process. Good little squirrel hole there. Go ahead, Barry. Especially if you've got a yak in the backyard where you can get the A2. Someone had a question. Over here. Yes, sir. The question is, do I suppose all these big dairies are using A2 bulls? And the lead into that was that if you AI'd 2 generations in a row to A2 bulls, you would breed out all the A1. I'm going to answer the last part first. It doesn't happen that fast. It takes longer than that. Well, yeah, it takes, especially if you're starting out with A1. But the big dairies, I think the thoughtful dairies read Woodford's book, how many years ago? 8, 10? And said, we better get on this. And now I can buy A2 milk at Fred Meyer's in Caldwell, Idaho. So that's a good thing. Yes, sir. Do we got to leave the room, or what are we doing here? Okay. I guess I'll answer this one, and can we do one more after that? Okay. What's the difference? So you get one from the mom and one from the dad. If mom and dad are both A2, you're going to get an A2 offspring. Okay? A1, A2, one of them had A1 and one of them had A2. Let's just say dad was double positive for A2 and mom was double positive for A1. You're always going to get an A1, A2. And it's in between. And a lot of cows are that way. Rock, you were? Okay. Okay. One more question there in the back. I now calve about 6 weeks earlier than I used to when I lived 100 miles further north and 2,000 feet higher. I calve right at the end of March, first part of April. I have my computer here. If you've got a zip drive, I'll give you Dick Diven's information about that. He's got a chart depending on how far north and south you are and the body condition you are as to when you probably ought to be calving. That's a great. The question is, that would put me in January. How would I finish then? I have a period of time from about mid-December, where I live now, until early March that I don't harvest. So I'm harvesting some before they're younger than 22 months, and then I harvest some later than that. I was averaging that number. So I've got 1 foot in boiling water and 1 in freezing water, and my average is... That's a good question. The best I've ever done. The best I've ever done. 1 year I harvested 2 heifers at 16 months, 3 weeks, and they weighed 660, 675 hanging, right in there. And I harvested 3 steers that were 17 months, 2 weeks. And they were 7 1/4 to 775 hanging. That's the best I've ever done. I dotted a lot of I's and crossed a lot of T's to get that done. Thank you very much for staying.
Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.